Então, muito bom dia. Queria naturalmente saudar todos os presentes e naturalmente saudar a Senhora Comissária Europeia para a Política Regional, o Sr. Ministro Adjunto e do Desenvolvimento Regional, os senhores deputados aqui presentes e também os oradores que estão aqui conosco na mesa e que irão participar nesta reunião. Estas palavras de bem-vindos a este Parlamento, o Parlamento Português, são naturalmente extensivas a todos, aqueles que integram esta organização, esta associação, mas ao mesmo tempo todos aqueles que acompanham esta realização, que tem o maior interesse em termos do debate sobre as políticas e desenvolvimento de políticas regionais e naturalmente também as questões relacionadas com a implementação e desenvolvimento dessas mesmas políticas. Mas penso que devo fazer uma intervenção agora não na minha língua mãe, portanto na minha língua do meu país, mas em inglês, para que todos possam acompanhar aquilo que eu desejo naturalmente referir. So, Assistant Minister and Minister for Regional Development, Mr. Miguel Poiares Maduro, Commissioner for Regional Policy, Mrs. Corina Creţu, Mr. Pedro Saraiva, MP, Mr. José Vieira da Silva, MP, Professor Roberta Capello, Professor Philip McCain, Professor Andrés Rodrigues Pose, invited participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is with a great pleasure that the Assembly of the Republic is hosting here in the Senate chamber the annual session of the 55th European Regional Science Association Congress. Personally, and on behalf of the Portuguese Parliament, I would like to welcome all the participants, particularly those who are part of this association dedicated to regional science. Considering this association as the aim of enhancing dialogue between political decision makers, local authorities and researchers, it is only right to acknowledge the fundamental role played by these events and recognize the value of the exchange of views that takes place at them. The organization of this event is also supported by the Lisbon School of Economics and Management and the Portuguese Association for Regional Development, the Portuguese section of the European Regional Science Association. It currently has around 160 members who pursue their careers at academic institutions and other public and private institutions connected to regional development. It aims to contribute to innovation, furthering and disseminating knowledge in the field of regional development and promoting the exchange of information and experiences among its members and professionals from many institutions. It encourages the meeting of the different disciplines involved and fosters collaboration between universities, public administration and companies and institutions rooted in the field with the aim of achieving a closer connection between scientific knowledge and the practice of regional development. Regional development policy is the European Union's one of the main investment policies. It is accepted as a priority area and as a specific financial envelope for it to be pursued at national level. It represents in the community budget for cohesion policy roughly a third of the amount allocated for the period 2014 and 2020. As well as the Cohesion Fund, regional policy is also implemented through the European Regional Development Fund and the European Social Fund. European regional policy takes the form of an instrument for promoting convergence between the different member states, helping these days, and these days are very important, to mitigate the effects of the crisis of recent years, specifically by increasing the co-financing rate in several countries. It also encourages those countries' dedication and commitment, since they must guarantee co-financing for the measures with funds in their national budgets. In the context of 2014 and the 2020 multi-annual financial framework, the European Union has made it a priority to contribute to smart, sustainable and inclusive growth, and has therefore defined a set of targets in the areas such as employment, very important naturally, research and development, energy and climate change, education, higher education and poverty itself, while each member state has adopted corresponding national targets in the different domains. In the achievement of these objectives, the promotion of investment in companies with the aim of creating employment and growth is advocated by the European Commission as the best strategy to follow to develop regions and their small and medium companies, which are true drivers of growth and innovation. European regional policy and other financial instruments, in harmony with the so-called Juncker package, should form an essential contribution to combating the negative effects of the crisis and promote economic growth in its member states, guaranteeing the necessary coordination so that the objectives defined in the multi-annual financial framework effectively correspond to development in the regions. In fact, Europe cannot be content, cannot be quiet until it is on an effective path to sustain growth that induces investment and creates employment. Alongside short-term circumstantial actions in light of countries' socio-economic contexts, regional policy should encourage medium and long-term development with better living conditions for countries and their peoples. However, and despite the efforts made by the European Union through its policies and related financial instruments, the regional dispersion of GDP in the European Union, according to NUTS 2 regions and measured by Eurostat, does not appear to record enough improvement in recent years, which perhaps reveals difficulty in implementing policies that promote convergence among regions, above all in the context of the crisis that has been affecting Europe since 2007 and 2008. The nature of results recorded in GDP dispersion deserves in-depth reflection by all the actors that contribute to pursuing regional policy, from designing policy and its different instruments to implementing and later evaluating it. It is important, therefore, to analyze and understand the factors underlying the performance of regional policy as an instrument of convergence and encourage the continuous evaluation of implemented policies and of the extent to which they help encourage economic growth with appropriate components and within the context of the targets defined by the Union for 2020. This is the only way to adjust the planning and design of politic and public policy measures and in the implementation thereof, with the aim of promoting policies that rebalance regions to raise them to a higher level of economic development, thereby boosting the impact of regional policy in the short, medium and long term and reducing the disparity between different regional contexts. Thank you for your attention, and now, pursuing our works, I give the floor to the Assistant Minister and Minister for Regional Development, Mr. Miguel Poiar Madures. Thank you.
Senhor Vice-Presidente, Senhores Deputados, Commissioner Corina Creţu, Professors, ladies and gentlemen, in a globalized world, regions are ever more important. This is so because it is in its territory and in its people that both the challenges posed by globalization acquire concrete meaning and also the answers to those challenges can be found. in the specific assets of the territory of the different regions, taking value of the diversity of those different regions and the competitive advantage that one can find in those assets. Your role as scientists is certainly that of identifying those challenges, but also the possible answers. And in the process, challenge politicians, policymakers, on the extent to which public policies address those challenges and provide the better answers to those problems that we face. It is therefore a real pleasure to welcome you in Lisbon and in Portugal, and I really wish you a very fruitful discussion in this Congress. In Portugal, we are well aware of the urgency and the depth of the challenges faced by regions. Since the accession to the then European Communities, now the European Union, Portugal has in the first 10-12 years strongly converged with Europe, very strongly converged with Europe. And we have certainly benefited a lot from accession to the European Communities and the funds that we got from the European Communities. But that process of convergence stopped for more than a decade now. For more than a decade, Portugal has not only no longer converged with the rest of Europe, but also convergence within Portugal, between Portuguese regions, as the Vice President also pointed out, not strongly improved. We have tried as a country to understand why that is so. Why, in spite, for example, of continuing to receive important funds from EU cohesion and regional policy, we have not managed to continue the process of convergence that had been initiated after the accession to the European Communities. It is certainly not because of EU funds, but it is in spite of EU funds. And we believe it is also linked to the way those EU funds have been used. For that reason, we have tried to profoundly reform the way we employ European Union structural funds for the future. We have changed the priorities. We have focused less on infrastructure, where Portugal is, in many areas, better than the average of the European Union, and focused more on improving competitiveness, on improving social inclusion. We have moved, if you want, from hardware to software. And I believe I can say this is a consensual position in Portugal, cross-party position. But we have also tried to change the rules and the sets of incentives that those rules create for the behaviour of actors. It's not only a matter of having a different set of priorities. It's not only a matter of supporting, financing different projects. It's also, through the way we give that financing, of changing the behaviour of public and private actors, so that those projects produce a stronger systemic change in terms of the goals that we want to pursue. We have also changed the governance model of EU structural funds. We believe, in fact, that we have taken steps that put us in the path to a return to convergence with the European Union that we have only recently now again initiated. But I believe that it's not only national policies on the use of EU structural funds that need to change. I believe also EU cohesion policy, EU regional policy needs to continue to change, as in fact it has started to change. Yesterday I was at dinner with the Commissioner, and I had the opportunity to say to the Commissioner that in my experience in these 2.5 years in government and with the area of EU structural funds, something I notice is that I believe sometimes the services of the Commission, the practice of the Commission, is too focused on reassessing, second-guessing individual projects of member states, and less focused than it should be on the systemic changes that EU regional and cohesion policy should produce at the level of member states. Certainly, the change towards a results orientation approach that has been taking place in EU regional policy is a positive one and goes in the right direction. But it's not enough, and I also know that the Commissioner is aware of this and that this current Commissioner really wants to continue to pursue the changes that are necessary in terms of EU regional policy. It's very important that the EU regional policy be thought more in terms of what is the right set of incentives to introduce and promote institutional changes at the level of member states that really make sure that the EU funds provide a difference, not in terms of specific changes, but in terms of the structural reforms that are necessary in the individual member states. It is also crucial that the European Union regional policy also pays more attention and invests more in the capacitation of national actors. We have certainly tried to do this at the national level, but it will be important if the EU policy itself will provide a stronger set of incentives to reinforce this capacitation of national actors, and do that also by promoting a stronger exchange and stronger partnerships between, for example, different national administrations. And third, I think another dimension that should be further pursued in terms of EU regional policy should be the promotion of cross-border networks. That is a crucial element that we know that in some cases is also now being developed, but that should be further taken, further in terms of EU regional policy. The focus on results, as I said, it's certainly important, and the new approach, results orientation approach, it's the right approach for the EU regional policy and the cohesion funds. But it's crucial for this approach to be taken seriously at all levels of decision making. It's not enough to state that member states should have in their partnership agreements a results orientation approach. It will be fundamental the way that the European Commission will actually set up the mechanisms to review the extent to which member states at all levels of the chain of decision making and all levels of the application of EU structural funds take seriously the results orientation approach. In Portugal, we have tried to do that in a large extent. I will give you just one example regarding vocational training. In Portugal, we had in the past cycles more than 2 million Portuguese that had vocational training. Well, not Portuguese, but more than 2 million vocational trainees. In some cases, the same people did more than one vocational training. More than 2 million. And yet, the impact that this has had in terms of our competitiveness has been limited, if we compare it with the investment in more than 2 million. And one of the reasons we believe, and that's why we changed the rules, is because the set of incentives on how vocational training was being funded was the wrong one. Vocational training was being funded, basically, dependent simply on the number of people that a vocational school, a training center will train. The more people you will provide training, the more funding you will get. Now, the new rule that we set up makes the funding depend on the job rate that will be obtained by those that will follow these vocational trainings. This completely changes the set of incentives for actors. Now they know that if they provide vocational training in an area where there's no labor demand, no market demand for those jobs, that they will not get the funding. They will also know that the higher the quality of their training, the higher the likelihood that these people will get a job in the market, and therefore they have a stronger incentive to invest in the quality of the training that they provide. And they also have an additional incentive to have proactive policies in terms of placing the people that they train in jobs. By changing the rule on how we give the money and linking it to a new set of incentives, we believe we really are pursuing a results orientation. And it is this that, in my view, the Commission should try to develop in terms of supporting the Member States and reviewing the way the different operational programmes, the different structural funds are being used at the level of the Member States. Another crucial development that I believe will be fundamental too is simplification, also at the level of the European Union. Also, there I believe the Commissioner has a challenge similar to every minister in a national government, that of changing the institutional culture of the administration to one that is less focused on formalism and more focused on results. Results orientation also means trusting less on form and more on simple rules, accessible rules, on assessing and evaluating the results, not the formalities. This is crucial if we want also to make, if you want, the EU structural funds more democratic, more accessible to a larger number of people. I believe that if there is a Commissioner that is well aware of these challenges and that really has an agenda to pursue these goals, is Commissioner Creţu. So I'm very confident that in fact the European Union will have and will continue to pursue a regional policy that will be more and more one that will produce results on the ground. But I also am well aware that without the incentive of the academics, of the scientists, without your research, without your questions, without your suggestions, we will never be able to find the right answers. So again, please enjoy the weather in Lisbon, enjoy the city, but also I wish you very fruitful discussions. Thank you very much.
Now I have the pleasure to give the floor to the Commission for Regional Policy, Mrs. Corina Creţu. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President of the Parliament. Thank you, Minister, for your very kind words. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, I am very glad to be here today. It's hard to work in Lisbon. And especially after the holidays, my first day actually of work after one wonderful week in Algarve. So, but first of all, I would like to thank the European Regional Science Association for this invitation to take part of this Congress, and of course to the President and all the members of the Parliament for their kind proposal to host today's session in this very beautiful building. And of course, I am very glad to be here in my capacity as European Commissioner for Regional Policy, because as the Minister said and you said, Mr. Vice President, I think the input from the academic world is very important, and I'm happy to see very senior professors, honorable members of the Parliament, but also students here. I think it's a very important mix of people who can come with ideas and proposals for the next steps that we have to take to do our policy better. And as the Minister said, result-oriented, to see more the results. I think it's very important to be better informed on what works and does not work in our policy. And of course, in this kind of debates, we are in a better position to fulfill our objective and to better serve people, because at the end of the day, our main objective is the same. This policy has been designed to improve the life of the people. So I think it's our unique objective, and we have to be glad that we have this unique feature of our European social market economy, regional policy, something that is shaped on the regions, and I think is very important to adapt this policy to every country and the needs of the country. And I think regional policy is the only policy that can do that in European Union. You know, Minister, that in our view as European Commissioner, I said always that Portugal has been performing very well in terms of executions of the programs, especially for the program 2007-2013. I was here in December to celebrate, because you were the first country which finished the execution of the program 1 year before the deadline. So I would like to congratulate you for that. But in the same time, I think it's very important to see, because we have a regulation in place made by the Council and the European Parliament as co-legislators. So of course, we should be innovative, but at the same time, we should see how this new regulation is working. And what you said, shifting the investment to innovation based on growth and competitiveness, it's a real challenge for every member state now. As I said to a Spanish journalist, we have to go to the next step, menos cementos, más conocimientos. And I think it's very important, especially in Portugal and Spain. And of course, Eastern Europe still has a need for infrastructure, but I also encourage them not to focus, because it's starting to be an obsession to use European funds just for infrastructure, just for highways. And this idea that with highways we resolve all the problems of one economy, and it is not true. It's very important to invest also in small and medium-sized enterprises, digital agenda, and I think other engines for growth, and I think it's very important. So I'm very glad that I'm here. I would have liked to assist to all your debates, but I understand that you had a very fruitful discussion until now on several aspects, such as measurement of well-being, urban planning and development, and the place of regional scientists. And from my side, I would like to quickly refer to my objectives of my mandate. In November will be 1 year since I took this post of regional Commissioner for Regional Policy. And I would like to also refer a bit to the state of play of our reflection on the future of cohesion policy, because we will need your help for that. And I think it will not be an easy battle, especially with, in this framework with many populistic and many people against our policy. I think it's very important to prepare ourselves for how the regional policy will be post-2020. Regarding my objectives for my 5 years mandate, of course, my absolute priority is to ensure that our investments reach the real economy, and it is result-oriented, and that they result as soon as possible the growth and jobs for the millions of our Europeans who are today unemployed. So all our energies, all our efforts are now devoted to supporting initiatives that embed a great potential for growth and jobs, such as EU 2020 strategy, the investment plan for Europe of President Juncker, the energy union or digital single market, to mention but a few. This is the only way to consolidate the incipient economic recovery and get the EU out of crisis. However, if we want our policy to produce a long-term impact on EU regions, we must couple these measures with further actions. In this context, we are currently working on 3 major areas. First area of work is the improvement of institutional capacity and good governance, including support to member states and regions that are facing particular difficulties in using our funds, as well as action on simplification for beneficiaries and reduction of administrative burden. So you know very well that we have a big battle around the budget and the figures and the money, but I think there is something much more important than money. This is administrative capacity. We have 8 countries now in Europe that in the end of December they will lose a lot of money, in spite of the fact that they didn't have only 7 years, they have 7 plus 2 years, and I think that proves that it's not enough. We have money in Brussels ready to go and be invested in very important projects, but it's this shared responsibility between the Commission and Member States, and I think it's very important for Member States to understand that it's up to them to make very important and reliable projects, and also to have the administrative capacity to implement these projects. I think this administrative capacity is something much more important than money. And of course, the second area of work is zero tolerance to fraud and error rate, and of course preparing the future of cohesion policy, as I said. I would like to say a few words about this reflection for post-2020. On the one hand, it should be based, in my view, on a sound and honest evaluation of successes and failures of cohesion policy over the last 2 decades. And on the other hand, it should be built on the first lesson drawn from the new programmes which have already been adopted under the reformed cohesion policy. The Commission plans to adopt by the end of this year a detailed report on the outcome of the negotiation of the partnership agreements and programmes, which I will be presenting, of course, to the European Parliament and the Council. We can already draw some tentative conclusions. First conclusion is that programmes have really been designed in a way to achieve the goals of the EU 2020 strategy. Following the reform of the policy, programmes rely on a sound intervention logic, fulfil to a large extent ex-ante conditionalities, and include robust indicators that allow to measure the results of our investments. Programmes concentrate financial support on a limited range of thematic objectives, which often goes beyond the minimum threshold set out in the regulation. And we will see how it works, but I think it was a very good innovative in the new regulation to concentrate in some areas of activities, because we have many examples of more or less wasted money in projects just to make absorption for the sake of absorption, and I think this is not a way we should go. But at the same time, we should not be so pessimistic, because we see in every member state how the countries were completely changed due to the European funds. And I was in Greece recently, and of course I was surprised to see such a wave against the European Union, because if you look at the pictures of Greece for 25 years ago, it's completely another century. And I try to have a lot of interviews to show how the European money, almost 100 billion in 25 years, changed the face of one country. And I had an interview with a journalist, and I said even in Athens you wouldn't have had the metro without European contribution, and he told me, I've heard that there are some money from European Union. Some money, there are 95% of the metro in Athens, so it's not some money. So I think it's very important for us, and we don't do enough to show that it's what is the European contribution to the development. And I can understand sometimes the regional politicians that they even don't mention that there are also some, even in the country I know best, I have discovered by myself there are some good projects of tramway and so on, because they didn't have this sign that they are done with the European Union, and always when there are elections, it is something that you want to show that you did. But I think it's very important to show also the good things and the bad things. But this policy have enough enemies and I think our duty will be to defend this policy in the next period. So let's the enemies to talk about the bad things, and let us to do whatever it takes to improve what was done until now. Anyhow, I would like to say a few words about smart specialization, because this was a true novelty in the new programming period regarding territorial cohesion, and I am very glad to see that this has been endorsed with unexpected enthusiasm by EU regions, and an impressive 156 EU regions have registered so far in the EU platform for smart specialization strategies, something that underlines the added value of this voluntary support instrument. So smart specialization, as you know, it doesn't mean that every region should be Silicon Valley, but every region has some strengths and some cheese or some good products to compete in Europe and in the world. So 8% of European Regional Development Fund resources has been allocated to integrated approach for sustainable urban development for more than 5% share that was required, and this urban agenda is also something very important. Although in my mind I have this dilemma coming in our countries, and even in Portugal, we have in the regulation to concentrate on the poles of growth around Lisbon, for instance. But what we are doing with the other part of the country, and I think it's very important thing that we have to think about together with you who are scientists, because having in the regulations this, and of course we have to help cities, and urban agenda is very important, but I think regional policy should also fight for closing disparities not only between countries, between regions, but inside the regions, between poor regions. And I came in Spain, for instance, without seeing any car, without seeing any person. I think I saw a car in 1 of 10 kilometers with huge highways. It's not about highways now, it's about unbalanced development of one country, which is a challenge for the people who are running the country, of course, for the politicians, but also for us as European Union, because I think moving like that, we will have poles of growth, and in the rest empty territory, which is not in our interest. So, as I said, it's a lot room for progress in dealing with regional policy, and also we developed many tools, such integrated territorial investments and community-led local development. So, also I would like to say about the use of financial instruments, and I'm glad to see that this has substantially increased with regard to the previous period. Almost 24 billion euros are now planned to be invested through financial instruments, which means almost doubling the figures compared to 2007-2013 period. At present, further to this evidence, we are starting to collect contributions from different sources, which will feed into our reflection. Of course, ex post evaluation, analytical work, external studies and reports, in particular those provided by the academic community, and of course a second source, contribution from the high-level group on simplification, our lagging regions initiative, and the task force on better implementation for 2007-2013 period. First insight on the implementation of the new programmes, such as an example of a high-level conference in early 2016 involving, among others, the European Parliament and the Seville Joint Research Centre, which will showcase a number of smart specialisation strategies. In this context, our intention is to involve from the very beginning all important stakeholders, and we intend to work in cooperation with national and regional policymakers, the academic community, international institutions like the OECD, the European Investment Bank and the World Bank, as well as NGOs and other stakeholders. And of course, as I said in the beginning, you are at the very forefront of this exercise. You are among those who know most the policy, and we will be much grateful for your input, reflection and knowledge. We have now the opportunity to change the future of millions of Europeans, and of course please share with us what you know. You will be helping us to do our job as policy makers. We expect this post-2020 debate to reach its full speed towards the end of 2016, and the Commission will mostly likely table its ideas for the post-2020 period in the 7th Cohesion Report in 2017, which will be followed by a large public consultation. Finally, we should submit the new Commission's legislative proposal in 2018. Of course, a number of factors are still unknown, and a lot will depend on the overall orientation of the EU budget for the post-2020 period. However, there are already a number of key questions that are likely to play a crucial role and that I would like to share with you now. For me, the first and central question is how EU cohesion policy can best contribute to its two complementary objectives, the two sides of its coin, competitiveness and cohesion. What is the added value of cohesion policy in this context? What is the best way to support the lagging regions, especially those which, in spite of decades of EU and national support, did not converge towards the EU average? We already had in Brussels a first round with a small group of academics. It was not something public, because it's very important for us to understand, as Minister said, but Portugal is not the worst case. It is a point where all these investments do not produce results. And I gave the example of Greece. As I said, 25 years of cohesion policy. But in fact, we changed the face of the country, but in the same time, we don't really generate the growth that the country needed. We have south of Italy, for instance. It's unbelievable how much money are going in the south of Italy, in Mezzogiorno, and they don't grow. So why is this happening in these lagging regions? It's very important to find together a response. And of course, we should decide together how should the architecture of the policy be defined. Should cohesion policy continue to invest in the advanced regions, especially in the metropolitan ones, which are not only richer, but also privileged by private investors? It's what I said before. Is very important to balance our thinking. And what is the best use of cohesion policy funds to stimulate investments in Europe? Which form of support is most efficient? Grants, repayable assistance, financial instruments, or their combination? Should the share of financial instruments in EU funds be further increased? Of course, also we are asking ourselves how can cohesion policy investments best contribute to overarching European priorities while keeping its territorial focus? How could cohesion policy address new or growing challenges such as, for instance, energy security, or in nowadays we have migration, and it will be a big challenge. ERDF, we have in EU 2020 strategy and in the Stockholm programme the idea that ERDF could contribute to the inclusion of migrants, but I don't think this is really working, and I think we should focus more, and we'll have next week in Brussels the college meeting, and of course we'll discuss all these challenges that we are facing in the European Union and all the countries. I think it's not what happened yesterday, for instance, in Austria, is not an Austrian problem, it's a European problem, and in a way or another every country is hit by this challenge that we have now with the migration. As I said, we have many questions that we would like to collect ideas from the professors and from the ministers, and also from the people on the ground, because they are the local administration that they know the best how it works and how our ideas could be implemented. So I look very much forward to your feedback on these questions, which can provide further evidence on what works and, as I said, what is not good with our policy. And I think this kind of conferences constitutes an excellent opportunity to have your say on how public investment should look like in the third decade of this century. So we count very much on your input for the benefit of this policy in particular and for that of the 500 million Europeans. And of course I wish you a very fruitful continuation of the Congress. Thank you very much for everything and obrigadissima.
Muito obrigado. Mulțumesc.
Thank you.
And now I give the floor to members of the Portuguese Parliament. First one is Mr. José Vieira da Silva. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Bom dia, good morning. Mr. Vice President of the Portuguese Parliament, Commissioner, Minister, Secretary of State, members of the Congress. I would first like to congratulate the organization of this 55th Congress of the European Regional Science Association and wish everyone great days of work here in Lisbon. I want also to thank the organization, this invitation to be here with you in this session. Ladies and gentlemen, the works of this Congress deserve special mention for two main reasons. Firstly, because they stem from an already very long tradition of debate and research that the European Regional Science Association is strongly promoting for several decades. Secondly, because the agenda of this Congress shows us a very close relationship between the research agenda in regional sciences and the problems and challenges faced by nowadays societies. This has long been a tradition of deep interconnection between regional sciences and the development of public policies. It is therefore natural that this concern continues to mark the priorities of the scientific community. The dynamics of asymmetries and regional inequalities has been, over time, a driving force for the construction of scientific thought in this area. But, of course, these dynamics have come to renew itself and continue to be at the center of the technical and political agenda. Following the theme of this session, science, policy and society, let me identify some of those who are, in my opinion, critical points that mark nowadays debate on regional dynamics in Europe and more specifically within the European Union. I will briefly highlight 5 points that I feel are of particular importance. First, the regional impact that the humanitarian crisis that marks in a very strong way the Europe of today. This crisis has many and complex structural origins that, naturally, I will not develop here today. However, the reality shows us that the crisis continues to worsen due to the impact of the changes and geopolitical and military tensions on the borders of Europe. It seems clear today that such tensions are causing migratory crises with different regional impacts that enhance new asymmetric development factors in Europe with effects difficult to predict both in the short and long term. Beyond doubt, there will be highly relevant factors for the future of several regions and should also mobilize the attention of the scientific community in this area. Second point, the transformation generated by the financial and economical crisis that marked the last years of Europe and of the European Union. Since 2008 financial crisis, since the 2008 financial crisis, we are facing a difficult period in Europe that was deepened by the development of the so-called sovereign debt crisis. The impact of this crisis was clearly asymmetric, as empirical evidence shows us. But, however, it is yet to assess the detailed geography of this crisis and how the different regions responded to such powerful external shocks. Third point, seems of paramount importance to understand the regional dynamics of the aging process that affects, albeit with different intensities, European societies. The process has high potential for deepening inequalities and regional disparities. Are the regions capable to mobilize adequate resources and policies to curb or reverse these risks? Are the regions appropriate stages for the definition of public policies to combat this kind of risks? These are important questions to ask when we know how difficult it is to face the challenge of aging at national level. The fourth point, the issue of regional and international mobility of citizens. This is a key achievement of European integration. However, we are experiencing some phenomena of migration of skilled labor, some mass phenomenon of migration of skilled labor that might introduce new risks of unbalanced development in Europe. Portugal is a clear example of that risk. Regional policies can be a part of the answer to this problem, and how the education and training policies can play a positive role in this context. The fifth question, one question that remains strongly linked to the challenges of regional science, and that is the issue of investments in infrastructures. It is today at the center of the European debate, the need for new policies in the structural investment through various financial and institutional tools or instruments. This effort is clearly aimed to strengthen European competitiveness and to respond to the employment and growth deficits that persist in a wider European area. But it will be unacceptable that such an investment effort does not clearly incorporate effective goals of enhancing regional cohesion in Europe. There is, I think, a large consensus that previous structural investment cycles have not been effective in overcoming heavy trends for maintaining or even deepening regional imbalances. Are we now able to benefit from scientific research and reflections on these risks to avoid, again, those risks in this process. Two final notes. Sometimes we think that the problem of regional imbalances or regional disparities, differences, are the scope of regional policies. And it is true. But in my opinion, the goal of regional cohesion in Europe must be a goal of all policies of the European Union. It is not fair and it's not possible to give only to the regional policies the role of combat, of fighting against the strong forces that the market and sometimes other policies induced in the regional differences and in regional imbalances. A second final note. We all know how distinct and distant are the times of research and political decision. The challenge to shorten this distance should be a common concert of researchers and decision makers. Strengthening technically informed decision and valuing prospective research and impact assessment can be good options for this common path. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Mr. Pedro Saraiva, also member of the Portuguese Parliament. You have the floor.
Good morning to all of you, and my compliments to our Vice President, to our dear Minister, to the Commissioner, and all the other members of the panel. I am quite proud to be a member of this panel, and particularly because I'm a member of Parliament, but most of all, I'm an academician. I'm a full professor at the University of Coimbra, and my interests are pretty much focused in the areas of innovation, entrepreneurship, quality management, regional development. So from time to time, I feel that I have both of parts of my brain getting together, and you gave me this opportunity by having here in the Parliament your 55th edition of the Congress. For someone who also got used to organize conferences, we know how hard it is, and reaching that magic number of the 55th edition is something I'd like you to congratulate, because it's not easy. And it means there is maturity around this community, and that we'll have more and more editions going on, and that's why quite hopeful for Europe in general. So you can understand quite easily that I can understand your concerns. I hope you understand my concerns as well now as a politician. And I strongly believe that we need to get across each other. We need politicians and public policies to become more and more based upon facts, evidence and scientific contributions on one hand. On the other hand, I believe we in the academic world need to address critical issues and come up with specific proposals and challenges to politicians so that increase the impact regarding societal changes that need to be addressed by universities as such. And therefore, I also enjoy the name of the conference. I think we really need a world renaissance. Maybe we need disruptive approaches for addressing the challenges of the 21st century, both in science and politics. And the solution is all about people and places. And that being the case, I was asked to raise a number of questions to our distinguished speakers and challenge also for yourselves as people that work international in this area. And these are my 6 questions. The first one is what can we do together to improve the way regional development scientific results are shared and used in a multi-level political governance model. That means at the local, the regional, the national and the international levels. And sometimes I find it a little bit disappointing because we have the results, but there's some more lost or not totally used. A specific example is the Barker report. I think it's a masterpiece. It dates back to 2009, very clear in terms of conclusions. And I must say Europe 2020 takes part of those conclusions, but some of the recommendations were not followed. And therefore, we make sure if you have sound evidence that it translates into a multi-level application of those concepts. Now, the second challenge is more for the politicians, but we need your help as well, coming from the academic world. What can we do to make sure that political discussions are not superficial, shallow, or unnecessarily aggressive, and that really they address in a deeper way, the way we like to address issues in the academic world, the real roots of the problems, and try to come up with the solutions for promoting societal changes and regional development. Question number 3. There's a paradox. Sometimes I hear lots of people talking about regional development but forgetting regions in the process. And if we are really addressing regional development, we need to take into account the role of regions as such. And I read once again a very interesting interview that Jacques Delors gave back in 2012 to the Panorama magazine. And he shared with the readers some kind of disappointment regarding the way regions were moving in Europe. And I quote Jacques Delors, "Unfortunately, what we have seen is an evolution towards excessive centralization with member states speaking for the regions. This is not the cohesion policy which I envisaged." End of quote. But it's not just a matter of faith. So I need for putting regions into the agenda, and I strongly believe in regions. I was twice the president of Regional Development Agency for the center of Portugal. We need more scientific evidence, and we need your help in order to explain that decentralization is quite a good solution for present challenges. I know the minister is with us in this fight, but it's not easy for central governments to understand that point. And the other thing I need to get more scientific evidence about is on providing clear results showing that bottom-up pays off, and that bottom-up is not more expensive in terms of public accounts rather than top-down centralized kinds of approaches. And this is a particular issue for Portugal because we are one of the more centralized countries in Europe. This brings me to our fourth point. We are all aware that there is strong pressure driving in terms of putting competitiveness as the central goal for Europe at all levels, but we need to understand that this needs to be achieved, but not forgetting at the same time that territorial cohesion needs also to be part of the political agenda, and the most recent years it seems to be that competitiveness is the only concern we should have, and I think this balance must be found. My fifth question has got to do with the myth of critical mass. And we need also more scientific support to sort of deconstruct that myth, because the scientific evidence we have, namely regarding regional innovation scoreboard results and national European Union innovation scoreboard results, it's very clear. The countries that lead innovation are the ones that have a broad set of strong innovative regions, as opposed to the countries that lag behind on national terms, that sometimes have just a single very innovative region or just a couple of innovative regions. So we need more scientific evidence so that the scientific community can let us show that critical mass has to be well interpreted and that's just putting all the efforts in R&D in a couple of institutions or a particular part of the country is not the way to go if you want really to build a nationally strong, competitive and innovative region. And the Europe 2020 indicators show pretty much the same. The countries that are doing better in terms of Europe 2020 monitoring results are the ones that have a broader scope of regions and a smaller standard deviation within their own countries. Okay, and the almost final question, which I find hard also to find scientific evidence to support decision as a politician right now, and I think government must have the same questions in Portugal and other countries. We talk a lot about multi-level governance models, but I think we need to have more sound evidence, fact-based evidence, scientific results to let us know what types of decisions are best handle at each of the levels, at the local level, at the regional level, or at the national or international level. And therefore I come to some final remarks. One is an additional challenge. I'm an engineer by background, so I'd like to hear from you about very practical, pragmatic suggestions on how we can improve interconnections between those that are involved in regional development tasks, both in academia and in the politics world. Some practical suggestions on how societies should move in order to achieve better bridges between these two worlds that in some sense are too much separated apart from each other. Some nations are moving in that direction. I see lots of nations where in the government structure there is a chief technology officer or a chief innovation officer. That's closing the bridge and giving a symbolic, clear idea on the relevance of science for coming up with clever politics in the 21st century. For instance, Barack Obama did so, and that had an impact in the States. On the other hand, I see lots of parliaments that by now have science and technology offices. It's another way of sort of building the bridge. And yesterday I was in Brussels. The weather was much worse than here. We keep the room warm so that you feel our warm weather in Portugal. And I was attending a workshop around the platform which is called the HE Innovate Platform. Its aim is to build entrepreneurial universities across Europe by using a self-assessment tool that now is available and was developed jointly by the European Commission and OECD. And that means there is also a lot of things to do on the side of academia so that we become more impactful. But in the end, it's all about people and places. So therefore, I need more of you for a certain period of your lifetime to become a politician and then eventually go back to academic world, because I don't feel comfortable with the fraction of politicians that have a scientific background, and that makes a lot of a difference. We have 308 municipalities in Portugal. I think we have maybe at most 4 mayors with a PhD degree. And for those mayors, it's quite easy to establish a conversation about regional development on a scientific basis, because they know what it is all about to come up with new knowledge. So, I hope you have a good stay in Portugal, and I'm very glad that we have the chance of having this morning taking place in the Parliament. The Parliament should be open to this kind of initiatives, and I'm glad that the challenge was well accepted by the President of our Parliament. I'm very glad that we have here the Commissioner, our Minister, our speakers, and all of you. And in the end, I think this is going to be a very fruitful event to push regional issues using an ever-increasing scientific support to be a part of the future that you want to build in the world that needs renaissance. And I was really very honored to have the possibility of having this part of the morning with yourselves. And there are no coincidences in our lives. Maybe this is the last intervention I will have as a member of parliament, and this was the best way of concluding what I've been doing as a politician since 2009, and now I'll go back to my university. Thanks a lot.
And as we say, perhaps it is the last, but it is not the least. And certainly you are going to develop good work in your university. Thank you for your participation here. And now, before I give the floor to the next speakers, I would like to say that one of the issues related to this Congress is to have some kind of challenge between politicians and scientists. So we heard politicians. The former interventions and the former speakers were generally politicians. So I am going to give the floor to scientists. So I'm sure that they noticed the different expositions by the politicians, the politics that they take care, and at the same time the questions that they raised. So in order to have the possibility that our scientists could answer to the questions that were raised and the politics that were presented. So I give the floor first to Professor Roberta Capello from the University of Milan.
Thank you very much.
You must speak in English, not in Italian.
No, I will speak English. I will do my best. So thank you very much.
I hope you accept this challenge.
Yes.
To answer to the questions of the politicians.
Okay. Thank you very much. So thank you, Mr. President, distinguished colleagues and friends, let me say. First of all, I don't know what about you in the audience, but I felt bombarded this morning by many critical questions that were asked by politicians, by the national politicians and by the European Commissioner. So this is a positive aspect because it gives us the idea that we have a role in life. But it's also a big challenge. We have a huge responsibility in order to reply to these questions. And I will pick up some of them, because there were many of them, and I will try to give my impression and my reply. First of all, there is the previous speaker asked a very important and crucial point, raised a crucial point. How can we bridge the gap between, or how can we link more the scientists, the academic activities to policies, and how can we orient our activities towards the policymakers in order to help them? We have listened to Mrs. Creţu asking us practical and crucial questions. So how do we move towards a clear reply to that? Well, first of all, as you all know, there is a problem of language, not Italian, English and so on, but a problem of how we express our results, how we interpret our results, how we are able to translate our results into practical issues and practical problems and reply to practical policy. And this is something that is extremely difficult, especially when we remain isolated in our academia without contacts with the policy aspects. But even when you get in contact with them, then we have a big responsibility there, because sometimes we forget, or we are not clear enough in underlying the conditions under which our results hold. So the preconditions for a policy to be effective is that it is done on the basis of conditions that have to be clear to the policymakers enough not to be to make the wrong choice. And I'll give you two examples. One hasn't been quoted this morning, but the other has been quoted a lot. The first one is the famous and now old theory of the growth pole theory by Francois Peroux. All of us know that. And this was a very simple, very revolutionary for that time idea that you can drive regional development by thanks to the presence of a leading firm. So a big firm that was the motor, the pusher of development could have, let's say, solved many of the problems that we had in the underdeveloped or lagging behind regions at that time, and Italy was one of them. So the policymakers got that message and translated it into let's produce and put big firms in underdeveloped areas so that the development will come. And what the mistake from the scientific side was not to underline enough that one aspect is to have already an indigenous large firm there, and the other story is to create a new one. So the famous dichotomy between a natural pole and an artifact pole, growth pole. And so this led to a huge dispersion of money, of resources, and to no real regional impact growth. That was a mistake. The second one was quoted so many times today, infrastructure. We have underlined that infrastructure was an accessibility. In academic terms, this means accessibility. Accessibility is a fundamental factor for development. So translating this into policy making means do an airport and then you will survive and you will grow. Again, this has led to many failures, policy failures in southern Italy, in Spain, in Portugal, and we came up with some solutions to the problem as scientists, because we all know that now that, and we teach to our students that infrastructure is the, let's say, the preconditions for growth, but infrastructure per se does not create any regional growth. And in order to develop a region, you need an infrastructure, so a factor of development coupled with other local factors that need to be there in order to synergetically create a possibility to grow. And I was really pleased to hear that we are moving towards the words of our commissioner was systemic change and systemic policies. So not infrastructure policies that do not relate to any other factors of development. That would lead to a disaster. So the time is running. The second, I pick up another point. How can, let's say, can we move to more evidence based policy? So how can we play a major role? Again, the major role that scientists can play is to help policymakers to develop their policies based on the sound scientific research. And here, this is linked to other two questions that were raised, the problem of competitiveness versus cohesion. How do we couple with this trade-off? There is now good and sound scientific research that claims that this is no longer a trade-off. If policy is done in a certain policy at the regional level is done in a certain way. Place-based policy is one way, and we have empirically tested that if we do some simulation scenarios, some simulation exercise of how the future of European territory looks like, if we put a lot of investments in second-rank cities, in cities where there are untapped resources and that have to be still exploited, then the result with respect to some scenarios where you go either only for cohesion, so you give investments only to rural areas, to lagging behind areas, or a scenario where you go for the most leading areas, so the winning areas, then the scenario that gives you at the same time higher competitiveness and higher and lower disparities is the first one, is the one where you put in place what is theoretically said in the Barca report and then put in place with the smart specialization strategy. The last point I would like to pick up, because it's late, is the idea of centralization. Where do we have to put our investments? Do we, especially in R&D? Do we have to follow this regional scoreboard measure that says that the most important areas are the ones that exploit R&D the most, and they have to be there because they are exploited? Well, again, here science can help in two ways. First of all, by showing that it is true that R&D needs a critical mass. That's true. All empirical analysis show that. But the second point is that there are, as all economic resources, also R&D has decreasing returns, suffers from decreasing returns. And this has to be remembered by policymakers. But the second and most important role that science can play is to underline that innovation is not only made of R&D. So we have to go away of this idea that in order to innovate, we have to invest in R&D. Otherwise, our regions are lost. No, as we are, let's say, sometimes aware, there are many other ways of innovating, and this is the role of scientists to pick up the ways that are in place already, so with the mass specialization, but more than that, pick up what is there and come up with policy suggestions for this different situations. But innovation is not R&D. Sometimes we run into this confusion because we are data-driven. We have the patent data, we have R&D data, so we like to play with them, so we call them innovation. Okay? But this, we have to remind that this is one of the innovations, and we have to make clear to the policymakers. Okay, the suggestions to, let's say, learn and to bridge the gap between policy and scientists, I think that this is only by going on and trying. So especially I have to say that I don't know whether, I'm sure that the Commissioner knows that the ESPON, the European Spatial Observatory Network, has helped a lot in this respect, because this is where scientists were asked to reply to and to produce resources with the policy issue in order to solve a policy issue. And there, this is where many of us have learned how to deal with these kinds of aspects, and especially, hopefully, also our results were interested in for the policymakers. So this was what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Professor Philip McCain, University of Groningen. You have the floor.
Good morning, or good morning, everybody. Thank you for this wonderful session, and I'm very honoured and delighted to be a speaker at this. I'm just going to really make one point. And I think there's enough people here who have seen me speak about these topics before, and I've written a great deal on them. But in terms of this forum today, an extremely important point is that the reforms to cohesion policy and the future cohesion policy has been heavily shaped by the ideas of people in the community of scholars and scientists working on regional and urban and economic geography issues. If I just look around this room today, obviously I'm looking from a particular vantage point, having been Special Advisor previously to Commissioner Hahn and now to Commissioner Creţu. But there are numerous people in our field who've contributed to the reforms of the policy. Not marginally, but very, very significantly in different roles. More than 200 people worked on the 6th Cohesion Report, of whom many, many people are members of the European Regional Science Association, working on the different components that contributed to the Cohesion Report. The different panels, the closed sessions, open forums, where decisions were made in terms of how to think about the policy, how to move forward on different levels. Again, people in this conference made huge contributions to that. And now the process has started again, because we're looking forward now towards the 7th Cohesion Report, which is due in 2017, which is really the statement of where the policy is intended to go in the coming years for the post-2020 agenda. 2018, I believe, is when the Commission's legislative proposals will be submitted. So between now and then, there's a huge amount of work to do. And again, people in the regional science community in Europe will play an enormous role and are already doing so. The process started, as Commissioner just said, in June. It was a very high-level meeting. And again, looking around the room, I can see half a dozen people here who are connected with those meetings. The process has started and is ongoing. So I think for me the most important message is that all of us can play a role here. The issue of capacity and capability in terms of governance and government administrations, public policymakers need help. They need advice, they need data, they need insights. And we know our regions better than anyone else does. We know the context, we know where we live, but we also know the data. We know the papers, we know the models. So it's important to think about how you can contribute. Who do you need to speak to? What contribution can you make in your localities? And as I say, regional scientists have made huge contributions, and I'm just fortunate because of the position I'm in and have been in, that I'm aware of the contribution. It has been enormous. But this is ongoing. The process is moving again for the post-2020 period. So I just encourage people and urge people to think about how you can play a role, who do you need to speak to, what can your universities and institutes offer by way of research, monitoring, evaluation, development of ideas, thinking about theories of change and so on, the issues that Roberta was talking about, how do they relate to our localities. And also, I would also encourage people not only to look at the 6th Cohesion Report and all the data sets which are embedded in that. It's a magnificent document, and a great deal of that has been put together by regional scientists. Also, I'd encourage people to look at the ESPON documents. Some of them are really outstanding. The ESPON Demo project on migration is the best thing on labour mobility. The KIT project that Roberta led, again, probably the best thing on innovation across Europe. There are so many. There's the Regional Entrepreneurship Development Index. Again, Groningen people were involved with that, along with Imperial, LSE. There is so much material out there that often, when we're writing papers, we're not actually aware of. Please go to the websites and start looking at how it relates to your localities. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Professor Andrés Rodrigues Poz, London School of Economics. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Minister Poyares Maduro, Commissioner Creţu, Vice President of the Parliament, Miranda Calla, Members of Parliament, dear friends and colleagues. I've been in the past a harsh critic of the policy, like many people in this room, mainly because the policy, as has been acknowledged to a certain extent by Commissioner Creţu and Poyares Maduro in the past, has not delivered. But there's good news. Every single programming period, the policy has become better. And not only better, it has delivered more. And we're getting, like any other policy, this is a learning policy, but going to the theme that Pedro Saraiva was saying of the Congress, Renaissance is a policy that is reborn every time. And the 2014 reform of the policy is a masterpiece of relearning and being reborn from a process that has started really in 1989. I'm just going to put some points. The policy has clearly realized that Europe, in the current circumstances, cannot rely on a few poles of development, on a few big cities, that there's potential everywhere, and that potential needs to be tapped. That's why we need to do place-based, and that's a principle of the policy. That's why we need specific plans through smart specialization for each region. The second point, which I think is fundamental, is that development is not just the result of spending money everywhere, but it's about how we spend it and who spends it and what institutions are behind. So this whole emphasis on institutions, that is now an essential, integral part of the policy, is absolutely revolutionary, not just for this policy, but for virtually most types of public policies. There has been a lot of emphasis on the idea that we need, and I congratulate myself again by the emphasis of Commissioner Creţu, on balanced development. We have paved many parts of Europe, it has been said several times, with transport infrastructure. But transport infrastructure alone is like building a table with one leg. We need four legs. We need better human capital. We need more innovation. I think Roberta Capello has emphasized that. We need a lot of focus on what are the bottlenecks for competitiveness in our firms. And this emphasis on integrated development is one that is going to make greater changes and greater capacity for development. And also the focus on results. The policy had an emphasis in the past that was basically linked to cohesion. And cohesion you can achieve by having the periphery grow, but also by having the core grow much less than the periphery, or not grow at all. What we want is to develop the potential, and the focus on results is also a fundamental step that has addressed one of the main problems that prevented the policy from working. What I'd like to say is that many of these ideas were born here at regional science, it has been emphasized by Phil McCann, meetings, and that the policy has listened, policymakers have listened. It's not that we are isolated, we're talking to walls, we're talking to people who have been listening and have been listening very well for quite a lot of time. But there's also a responsibility in us. We generate ideas, but we are only part of the process. If the policy has changed and is delivering better, it's because not just we from our ivory towers are thinking about the problems, assessing, providing evidence base on which policy is based, but because there are civil servants at the EU level, at the national level, at the regional level, at the local level, that day by day look into the problems and say, how can we address these problems? They come with their own ideas and then they contrast with what is happening elsewhere, what is happening in academia. Also because local, national and regional officials have played their role responsibly. And also because, after all, they are decision makers, politicians, that we must not forget. They are the ones that have the mandate and the responsibility and the legitimacy to do changes, that are listening to what we are saying and what officials are saying. In this, I think we have a moral obligation. We have a tendency sometimes to say, people don't listen to us, but we need to engage. We need to reach out. We need to go beyond our ivory towers, just be at our conferences, and go and talk to officials, go and talk to decision makers, and insist if we think we have a good idea. Because we can see, and we have seen through the European cohesion and regional policy over time, that they are listening and they are helping, we are contributing to make a policy much better, much more efficient. If we continue like this and we reach much more, what we are going to achieve is that in a situation like the one Europe has been for the last few years, with all the challenges, we're going to use public money, not just in a better way, but in a way that is going to improve the quality of life, the well-being, and the levels of employment growth of individuals and regions of Europe. Thank you very much.
Well, all the members of our panel have used the floor, and so perhaps I could ask to the assistants if there is any kind of question that could raise to the different speakers that made the expositions here. Yes.
Good morning.
Could you present yourself?
Joaquin Oliveira Martins from the OECD Regional Development Policy Division. I just would like to make a comment on what I heard from Commissioner Creţu and also Mr. Vieira da Silva about what we are demanding on regional policy. This idea that regional policy would be in charge of the convergence problem in Europe, and it didn't deliver. I think indeed we are perhaps demanding a bit too much to the regional policy alone. If you take a country like Portugal, in the middle of 90s, it was a small open economy with a sort of specialization twisted towards medium, low-skill type of products. Three major shocks, the enlargement of the European Union, the opening of the markets for countries like China, then the entering of the EU. These are tremendous structural shocks, right? And I think the role of the cohesion policy needs to be assessed in some sense against a scenario where it would not take place, would not have access to these funds. I think these shocks generating a very profound structural adjustment in a small open economy like Portugal, and I think that the structural funds provided some support to this transformation. Now, of course, we can say that the use of the money perhaps was a bit excessive, as Andrew said, in terms of road infrastructure. Perhaps some of the money was used in a way that didn't help this problem of the tradable sector, because indeed the entering of the small open economy like Portugal in the Eurozone rebalanced a bit the economy towards the non-tradable sector, and this may have had indeed an impact on the overall productivity of the country, because this rebalancing of the economy towards the non-tradable sector encountered a situation where there was perhaps lack of better regulatory framework, more a competitive, a competition type of policy rules, and indeed perhaps this rebalancing didn't have the expected impact. So the regional policy perhaps didn't help this compensation, and perhaps exacerbated some of these issues. But still, I think, we have to acknowledge these very profound structural shocks that a country like Portugal experienced over the last, say, 10-15 years. Looking ahead, I think regional policies has a very important role to play. Structural policies defined on an economy-wide basis, like product market, competition policies, product market flexibility, structural policies. Well, they are very important, and certainly a country like Portugal should continue to do that. But these policies, in the short, medium run, may have some deflationary effects. They need to be done with some careful a tuning. They need to be done with a certain attention to the balance across these different types of policies. There are a lot of synergies, interrelationships about these policies, and one policy is done in a very aggressive way, perhaps, and others not. This may have an impact that is perhaps not the one that would have expected. So these structural policies have certainly a very important impact, but they may be in some sense managed with careful tuning. And the OECD recently has done a study on the problem of convergence, and we found that when we decompose the overall rate of growth and productivity in the OECD, we found that actually the problem is not the frontier. So you can always decompose the rate of growth of a country or productivity in two things, the frontier and the lagging effect. The problem is not in the frontier. The sectors that have been pushing the frontier continue to push the frontier more or less at the same rate. The firms that are the most innovative continue to do this innovation more or less at the same rate. The problem is the lagging sectors and firms, and probably also the lagging regions. It's not normal that these entities do not benefit from this catching up, from the movement in the frontier. They find, as benchmark numbers, they find that overall this frontier continues to be pushed at 2-3% per year, but the lagging entities that should actually grow above the average, because this is catching up, are totally flat. So this explains why the growth rate may be low, and also there are more inequalities. So in this context, clearly, the structural policies didn't have perhaps delivered the expected impacts. These trickle-down effects, these diffusion effects didn't have the expected impact. And this is true perhaps in Europe, but also outside Europe, where there is no cohesion funds. So this is a problem that is really OECD-wide, and I think the more granular, more place-based policies have a very important role to play to trigger, to stimulate, to enhance these convergence mechanisms. So this is a very important role for structural policy. Of course, another important role for structural policy that in some sense other types of policies don't do is perhaps use some of these funds to rebalance an economy like Portugal towards a bit more the tradable sector. And for that, of course, we need a careful tuning of this policy, which perhaps was not done in the past. And finally, in a country like Portugal, using some of these funds for continuing this investment in education, what can we dream about sort of a more profound structural impact in an economy for Portugal for investing in the future? So, all in all, I think don't be too demanding on the impact of these funds in the past. Take into account, what these tremendous shocks that an economy like Portugal, but all other economies in Southern and Eastern Europe experienced, and also these challenges, for the future. I think the role of structural funds will be and continue to be very important in this context. Thank you. Sorry, it was a bit.
Is there anyone from the audience that wants to? Okay. Yes. You have the floor. Could you present yourself? No microphone. Okay. So,
okay.
Loud.
Hello.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this session. I'm Giorgia Cacciani, and in addition to being a PhD student in Barcelona, I've been to the government in a position of Director for Innovation Policies in Albania, because I'm Albanian. And one very important point which was brought up in here was how we can combine academia with politicians and policies. And what I have seen in these years, it has been truly difficult. And my question is, can scientists, like academia, think like a scientist and act like a politician? And can politicians think like a politician and act like a scientist? I mean, are these two sides going to tolerate each other in order to have and implement good policies? Of course, in my country and in Southeast Europe, this hasn't been very successful. I believe that the honorable colleagues and especially the Commissioner is very much involved in that. But if we don't make a dialogue, if you don't cooperate, if you don't tolerate, because we know that politicians have their agenda, they have their own interest, and also we know that the scientists, they want their research to be top in their field. So this is what I'm asking from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Could you present yourself?
My name is Gunther Meyer from Vienna, Austria. I have a question particularly to Andres Rodriguez Posé, and basically in your function as president of RSAI. The way you argued here could be understood, and I'm pretty sure you didn't mean it this way, but could be understood in such a way that, well, if we present our ideas, our results, if we in conferences, if we write our papers, publish our papers, the results will be picked up by policymakers and turned into policy. And my question to you really is, now what does RSAI and ERSA at the different levels do in order to help with this communication, or what should we do? What should the organization do? Is there something we can do that we can take out from this meeting as ideas to implement into the structure to support this communication and dialogue with policymakers?
Thank you very much. And I saw someone there. Please, you have the floor. You? Could you present yourself?
Good morning.
Thank you. Nazmiye Baltaözkan, Cranfield University, UK. A couple of the panel members argued the importance of evidence-based policy making, which obviously it's hard to disagree. My question is, given the developments in ICT technology, information and communication technologies, and the transition towards digital economy, what opportunities and challenges are there for regional science and policy? So it is about, in terms of tools and methods that we have, do they rise up the challenges that are coming with digital economy? Are the education programs that we are running at the universities, are they right? What else, what kind of changes need to be made, and how, I will be interested to hear your views on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are no more questions from our audience. Of course, naturally, there is another one.
Good morning. My name is Sandra Di Biagio, and I come from the ESPON program. So the ESPON program has been mentioned twice this morning. I feel just the need to first thank the organizers for such a grateful Congress, in a way that it's so important what you have been mentioned, linking the scientists with the policy makers. And the fact that the ESPON program is now like 14 years old, and we have been always increasing and enhancing this dialogue, which sometimes it's not so easier. And I just would like to mention that we really believe also in the cooperation that we have with the Commission, with the Member States, with different regions, that this is the way to go. And that sometimes it's not only the translation issue, as Roberta said, but also the context, the territorial context. So a certain result might not be exactly the same application with different contexts. And the need for working together and to keep dialoguing and to keep finding common solutions. So, and we really think that this is also in the terms of building up a territorial science community involving different disciplines. This is the way also to working with academia, to involving policymakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last question is here.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm Renan Baleiras from the University of Minho, northern Portugal, and a member of the Portuguese Public Finance Council. And I am personally very engaged in the transfer business between science and policy, and I'm puzzled by the over-dominance that worldwide we see macroeconomics has on the whole of government. And macroeconomics, by its nature, is space-blinded, okay? And it is quite difficult in many governments to communicate the importance of space, of territorial assets in the design of public policies. And to a large extent, regional development, which is across the board discipline, has many difficulties to persuade finance and economy ministers. To some extent, there are faults on the scientific community itself, and so I'd like to ask the panel what can be done from the scientific community to try to change the weight of territory in the whole of government decisions. In particular, I believe that economics departments are dequalifying for quite a long time the importance of regional and urban economics disciplines, and this has an impact on the academic background of politicians when they come to the government, even those who have an economic background. Okay, so it's a challenge for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to Commission for Regional Policy, Mrs. Corina Creţu. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. I just, of course, I don't want to respond to all the questions. In fact, many of them were not questions, but I would like just to say that I am so impressed about the quality of the debates, and I am very grateful to all of you that you were here, and I am very impressed by your interest in regional policy. And as I said, for us and international institutions like OECD, IMF, World Bank, of course NGOs, and above all academia, they are very important for us. And we had started a series of consultations in Brussels. This is another one, but we have to find ways to put together all these very good ideas. And I think it's very important to put together. There were some stages in which every member state should have gone through. So we have now countries like Eastern Europe, and they still need accessibility and they still need infrastructure. It was a stage when Bridge Vasco da Gama was needed also in Portugal and also in Greece or other countries. We have big infrastructures which had been hardly built without European funds because they are enormous invested. And of course, I think we have to talk about regional policy, about bottlenecks, about things we can improve, but we have to give to the Caesar what is to give to the Caesar. So regional policy was in many countries the main source of public investments through the crisis. And I think still many countries are counting on European funds, and we have countries with, from Austria, for instance, where European funds are counting, of course, just 5%, but we have countries like Greece, where public investments are counting 85% are coming from European funds. So, of course, interest is very different in different countries, and as you know, for the next 7 years, all 80% from our 350 billions will go to the regions who are very poor and are in the most need. So I think it's very important that I would like to underline that it's very important which kind of projects the countries will submit for the next programming period. And this is a role of smart specialization, to put together all the minds, because in each region, no matter how poor they are, even in the poorest regions, they have some teachers, they have some business people and local authorities to think about their future for the next programming period. Because the programs that we will adopt in the next, all the member states will adopt in the next months in the new operational programs will shape the future of these regions for 7-10 years. So I think it's very important to have this innovative capacity to make this change in practice now, because now there are money available for the next programming period, and this is the timing for the programs that we design. And I am very moved by the question put by this beautiful Albanian lady, and I would like to congratulate you. And you can imagine that coming from a country that 25 years ago was on the other side of Iron Curtain, this is my main preoccupation now, not to transform this Iron Curtain in a poverty curtain. And I think it's my duty as Commissioner for Regional Policy to help these regions who are the poorest, but we have to work together. That is the most important. And as far as the non-EU countries, but they are, of course, we are feeling that we have to do also something for these countries to dream as we did 25 years ago, that the future for them will change and you'll be part of this big European family. And I'm very confident, because sometimes last 3 months I was in Riga. It was presidency of the Latvian presidency of the EU, and I was there and I said, who would have seen 25 years ago that a former Union Soviet country will lead European Union, and me and you as a Latvian, a Romanian as a Latvian, will take decision for the whole Europe. So you never know where history goes, but I am very glad that Albania is doing very well in many aspects in the last years, and of course I think it's very important that you are here in Europe and people like you to go back and with what you, because sometimes, you know, it's not a matter of not wanting, not have a willing. Sometimes the countries and the region really do not know how to do things. For instance, we have a lot amount of money on energy, and some regions, they really do not know which kind of projects they should put in this. And this is why I put a lot of emphasis, and I very much appreciate this exchange of good practices. Peer-to-peer. If you have a problem like a member state in public procurement, for instance, we'll go in 5 days and we can send you the best people we have from Portugal, for instance, or from Spain, who are doing very well. And I think it's very important to put, we have 24,000 people in all Europe dealing with European funds. And this is an enormous experience that we should use in a much more productive approach. And of course, as I said before, I am very grateful to the academicians, professors, senior teachers, and my personal advisors are coming from different institutions of academy, and I am sure we can put together all our ideas. And about the last remark I would like to say about the difference between politicians and people who are professors. As you have here examples that can be both politicians and professors, and also the Minister Maduro was excellent in using all these things, but for some people it's impossible to have a mind of scientist, because we are not scientists. But we can assure you is that from the first day when I become commissioner, of course I am a politician, but regional policy for me has not political color. So I think we are together in the same boat. Regional policies for the people, and if you believe me, when I go in a country, of course I have ideas where I go, but I don't even ask which color is this government where I go. I only measure the things and the achievements through what they have done with the European funds, and I think this is very important for us to keep this. As I said before, we have so many enemies of cohesion policy, of regional policy, and countries who are still needed for the people, they have to be together, no matter that they are socialist or they are from the right side. I think there are things in which we should act together, because otherwise we undermine our chances to go forward with our policy in post-2020. Don't forget that this budget for regional policy after 2020 should be approved by the European Parliament, which already has from 700 people, almost 200 people who publicly are against this, to give such a big amount of money to the countries, directly to be managed by the countries. And I think we have to fight for that to continue. And we can succeed only being united, all of us, in Europe. So, and this idea of net contributors and net beneficiaries is another line of a fracture, I could say, in Europe. And I think it's good to come together and to explain also to the net contributors that this money are not a charity, as they are not given in vain. So I think it's very important for us to have a united and clear line to take and to promote in Europe in fighting for the new cohesion policy and reformed cohesion policy. Thank you once again. I am very glad to be here, and I really enjoyed this session. Thank you to all of you.
Well, I think that you want to...
Just a couple of specific points in response to the comment of Joachim. You're completely correct that sometimes I've heard people say, well, regional policy doesn't work because we're not seeing convergence across Europe. I have to put this in perspective. European cohesion policy is 0.34% of European GDP. The UK alone on education spends 2.5 times as much annually as the whole of European cohesion policy. Space-blind expenditure on educational investments is about 18 or 19 times bigger in Europe than place-based interventions. So if we put orders of magnitude there, then we start to get a sense that the cohesion policy is not responsible for cohesion, not responsible for convergence or divergence issues. It contributes to those processes, but those processes are shaped by global forces. It's important, however, using advanced econometric techniques and so on, to try to isolate the effects. And what we do know is that there's more than 50 papers published now on evaluating cohesion policy using CG models, econometrics, different types of counterfactual techniques, and 3/4 of those papers find broadly positive results. Half find very strongly positive results, and there's a whole series of papers which are forthcoming, some of which are actually being presented in this conference, using more and more sophisticated econometric techniques, and they do basically find that in general the policy does what it is intended to do. It's not perfect and it doesn't always work, but the weight of evidence is very, very strongly in favour that the policy does what it is intended to do. That is not a reason for complacency, but it's a grounding, and it refers to exactly the point that Andres made, that we do learn over time from policy, and of course that's part of our role as academics as well, to contribute to that debate. The question about politicians and academics is an important one. Obviously, the Commissioner has answered that. There's also another way to think about it. If somebody asks me, can you name one person whose ideas most heavily influenced the reforms to cohesion policy? The answer is a person who is not a geographer and has never really written on regional issues. His name is Danny Roderick. Roderick's arguments are more fundamental to the reforms of the policy than anybody. There are huge insights from many, many people. And Roderick's key argument, wonderful paper last year in the Journal of Economic Perspectives, when ideas trump interests. The way that political reform works is that you have to identify a key set of themes that you can embody in an idea where potentially opposing interest groups realize that they can connect and start to move together. And this is what smart specialization and results orientation is all about. Academics, policymakers, people from different political persuasions, people who are from different interest groups, the private sector, the public sector, and civil society have a common language which has come out of an academic idea, very, very heavily researched, but it's translated into a way of thinking about policy prioritization which is pragmatic, which is reasonable, and which is feasible. The famous Cash et al. Paper in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2003. Policies fail. Any policy fails unless it has 3 criteria: credibility, salience, and legitimacy. The idea has to be credible. The knowledge has to be credible. It has to be salient, in other words, relevant for the people who are the beneficiaries of the policy, and it has to be legitimate in a political sense. People have to understand all of those 3 elements mean that the policy takes into consideration the needs, aspirations, and wishes of the people. And this is a classic Roderick way of thinking. And so smart specialization is exactly that. So this idea of bridging constituencies is not just academics and politicians, it's different academics, different politicians, civil society, private sector. But it's finding a narrative, a language that people think, actually, that makes sense. It's not perfect, but it is workable and we can make progress. The final point is, the point about ICTs, I think that was a really interesting question, and I have I have thoughts about it, but I think maybe Roberta, you would want to answer this. Roberta? I don't think you can hear. I was just thinking the question about ICTs and innovation probably relates more to the kit work than anybody else, so I think I won't answer that. I think Roberta is the best person to answer this.
Okay, so I give the floor to your colleague, and the last one Pose. Okay, so.
Well, I will be very brief. Well, the idea of ICTs coming up and could change the way in which we let's say, work and we behave, I am rather skeptical about. These are instruments, we have to learn how to use them, but in any case it's been demonstrated several times that these are not substitutes but are complements to other instruments that we can have. Just briefly going back to the question that was raised there on macroeconomic policy and the fact that macroeconomists or policymakers that deal with macroeconomic issues, they don't care about space. They don't, let's say, think about. I totally agree. This is a huge problem that we have at all levels, all levels of the governance, and there is the only thing that we can do is to build little by little a sensitivity and show that macroeconomic policies and measures and trends have a different impact at the regional level, so both at the intra and at the international level. So that's absolutely true, and my reply is we need time to overcome this ignorance, inverted comma. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last one, please.
As I know that time is of essence, I'll be brief. There was one direct question directed to me, and I'll weave it to the question from our colleague from Albania. Talking to politicians is not always, and decision makers is not always easy, but it's like talking to anyone else. In my relationship between academia and decision makers, I find that there are three types of relationships. Those decision makers that want to co-opt you. They have their ideas, they have their policies, and they want you to justify their policies technically. There are those that have their ideas. We, after all, elect them because they got good ideas, but they're willing to listen. And there are those that are looking for new ideas. Guess what? Of three categories, you have 2/3 of a chance that people you have a good idea are going to listen to you. To Gunther's point, how do we go about this? I think we can go individually. We have an individual duty to reach out to decision makers, and we have to build bridges. But there's more that we can do also collectively, as the Regional Science Association International, as the European Regional Science Association, as all the super regions that we have. And we are doing more and more. We are participating, the European Regional Science Association this year, heavily involved in the open days that will take place in October. We have seen over the last few years, year after year, participation by members of the Commission at European conferences, by members of the OECD. The European Investment Bank plays a crucial role in our conferences. We provide, at the moment, the largest directorate of people interested in regional sciences in the world. And I know that decision makers at national level, decision makers at the European level are listening. Can we do more? Yes, and it's our duty to do more. It's our duty to reach out. If we stay, as you were saying, and this I think I mean it clearly, in our conferences and talking amongst ourselves, we're staying on our ivory towers, but we are forgetting one of our essential duties, which is to reach out to the community and try to make sure that whatever we do has policy relevance and an impact that improves the lives of people in the territories that they live.
So, thank you very much. I think that we are arriving to the end of our meeting. Of course, I would like to thank all the distinguished speakers that are in this panel, but in the audience, and all the invited participants for being here. I must declare this session closed, and I hope that this 55th Congress has achieved its objectives. And for me, I would like to say that I didn't notice any kind of borders between politicians and scientists. Finally, at the end of the day, we are all politicians. And why? Because we are interested in the people, we are interested in the places where we live, we are interested about the quality of life. So, I think it was a good lesson for this beginning and for this debate. Thank you all for us, and the close session.
The meeting now.
Yes, yes, yes.